Chapter 39. This is called Burt and the Ickabog Defence Brigade. We now return to Shoeville, where some important things are about to happen. I'm sure you remember the day of Major Beamish's funeral, when little Burt returned home, smashed apart his Ickabog toy with the poker, and vowed that when he grew up he'd hunt down the Ickabog and take revenge upon the monster that killed his father. Well, Burt was about to turn 15. This might not seem very old to you, but in those days it was big enough to become a soldier, and Burt had heard that the brigade was expanding. So, one Monday morning, without telling his mother what he was planning, Burt set off from their little cottage at the usual time. But instead of going to school, he stuffed his school books into the garden hedge where he could retrieve them later, and then headed for the palace where he intended to apply to join the brigade. Under his shirt for luck, he wore the silver medal his father had won for outstanding bravery against the Ickabog. Burt hadn't gone far when he saw a commotion ahead of him in the road. A small crowd was clustered around a mail coach, and he was far too busy to try and think of good answers to the questions Major Roach was sure to asking. Burt walked past the mail coach without paying much attention. What Burt didn't realise was that the arrival of that mail coach was going to have very important consequences, which would send him on a dangerous adventure. Let's allow Burt to walk on without us for a moment or two so I can tell you about the coach. Ever since Lady Eslander had informed King Fred that Cornucopia was unhappy about the Ickabog tax, Spittleworth and Flapoon had taken steps to make sure he never heard news from outside the capital again. As Shoeville remained quite rich and bustling, the king, who never left the capital anymore, assumed the rest of the country must be the same. In fact, the other Cornucopian cities were all full of beggars and boarded up shops, because the two lords and Roach had stolen so much gold from the people. To ensure the king never got wind of all this, Lord Spittleworth, who read all the king's mail in case, had hired gangs of highwaymen lately to stop any letters entering Shoeville. The only people who knew this were Major Roach, because he'd hired the highwaymen, and Cankerby, the footman, who'd been lurking outside the guards' room when the plan was hatched. Spittleworth's plan had worked well so far, but today, just before dawn, some of the highwaymen had bungled the job. They'd ambushed the coach, as usual, dragging the poor driver from the seat, but before they could steal the mail sacks, the frightened horses had bolted. When the highwaymen fired their guns after the horses, they merely galloped all the faster, so that the mail coach soon entered Shoeville, where it careered through the streets, finally coming to rest in the city within the city. There, a blacksmith succeeded in seizing the reins and bringing the horses to a halt. Soon, the servants of the king were tearing open long-awaited letters from their families in the north. We'll find out more about those letters later, because it's now time to rejoin Burt, who'd just reached the palace gates. "Please," said Burt to the guard, "I want to join the Ickabog Defence Brigade." The guard took Burt's name and told him to wait, and then carried the message to Major Roach. However, when he reached the door of the guard's room, the soldier paused because he could hear shouting. He knocked, and the voices fell silent at once. "Enter!" barked Roach. The guard obeyed and found himself face to face with three men. Major Roach, who looked extremely angry, Lord Flapoon, whose face was scarlet above his striped silk dressing gown, and Cankerby the footman, who, with his usual good timing, had been walking to work when the mail coach came galloping into town, and had hastened to tell Flapoon that the letters had managed to find their way past the highwayman. On hearing this news, Flapoon had stormed downstairs from his bedroom into the guard's room to blame Roach for the highwayman's failure, and a shouting match erupted. Neither man wanted to be blamed by Spittleworth when he returned from his inspection of Margrunter's and heard what had happened. "Major," said the soldier, saluting both men, "there's a boy at the gate, sir, name of Burt Beamish, wants to know if he can join the Ickabog Defence Brigade." "Tell him to go away," barked Flapoon. "We're busy." "Do not tell the Beamish boy to go away," snapped Roach. "Bring him to me immediately. Cankerby, leave us." "I was hoping," began Cankerby in his weaselly way, "that you gentlemen might want to reward me for—" "Any idiot can see a mail coach speed past them," said Flapoon. "If you'd have wanted a reward, you should have hopped on board and driven it straight back out of the city again." So the disappointed footman slunk out, and the guard went to fetch Burt. "What are you bothering with this boy for?" Flapoon demanded of Roach once they were alone. "We have to solve the problem of the mail." "He isn't just any boy," said Roach. "He's the son of a national hero. You remember Major Beamish, my lord? You shot him." "Yeah, all right. There's no need to go on about it," said Flapoon irritably. "We've all made a tidy bit of gold out of it, haven't we? What do you suppose his son wants? Compensation?" But before Major Roach could answer, in walked Burt, looking nervous and eager. "Good evening, Beamish," said Major Roach, who'd known Burt a long time because of his friendship with Roderick. "What can I do for you?" "Please, Major," said Burt, "please, I want to join the Ickabog Defence Brigade. I heard you're needing more men." "Ah," said Major Roach, "I see. And what makes you want to do that?" "I want to kill the monster that killed my father," said Burt. There was a short silence, in which Major Roach wished he was as good as Lord Spittleworth at thinking up lies and excuses. He glanced towards Lord Flapoon for help, but none came, although Roach could tell Flapoon too had spotted the danger. I mean, the last thing the Ickabog Defence Brigade needed was somebody who actually wanted to find the Ickabog. "There are tests," said Roach, playing for time. "We don't just let anybody join. Can you ride?" "Oh, yes, sir," said Burt truthfully. "I taught myself." "Can you use a sword?" "Oh, I'm sure I could pick it up fast enough," said Burt. "Can you shoot?" "Yes, sir. I can hit a bottle from the end of the paddock." Said Roach. "Yes. But the problem is, Beamish, you see, the problem is you might be too foolish," said Flapoon cruelly. He really wanted this boy gone so he and Roach could think of a solution to the problem of the mail coach. Bert's face flooded with colour. "What?" "Your schoolmistress told me," lied Flapoon. He'd never spoken to the schoolmistress in his life. "She says you're a bit of a dunce. Nothing that should hold you back in any line of work other than soldiering, but dangerous to have a dunce on the battlefield." My marks are all right," said poor Burt, trying to stop his voice from shaking. "Miss Monk never told me that she thinks I'm—" "Well, of course she hasn't told you," said Flapoon. "Only a fool would think a nice woman like that would tell a fool that he is a fool. Learn to make pastries like your mother, boy, and forget about the Ickabog. That's my advice." Burt was horribly afraid that his eyes had filled with tears. Scowling in his effort to keep from crying, he said, "I'd welcome the chance to prove I'm not a fool, Major." Roach wouldn't have put matters as rudely as Flapoon, but after all, the important thing was to stop the boy joining the brigade. So Roach said, "Sorry, Beamish, I don't think you're cut out for soldiering. However, as Lord Flapoon suggests—" "Oh, thank you for your time, Major," said Burt in a rush. "I'm sorry to have troubled you." And with a low bow, he left the guard's room. Once outside, Burt broke into a run. He felt very small and humiliated. The last thing he wanted to do was to return to school, not after hearing what his teacher really thought of him. So, assuming that his mother would have left for work in the palace kitchens, he ran all the way home, barely noticing the knots of people now standing on street corners, talking about the letters in their hand. When Burt entered the house, he found Mrs. Beamish was still standing in the kitchen, staring at a letter of her own. "Burt," she said, startled by the sudden appearance of her son, "what are you doing home?" Toothache," Burt invented on the spot. "Oh, you poor thing, Burt." "We've had a letter from Cousin Harold," said Mrs. Beamish, holding it up. "He says he's worried he's going to lose his tavern. I mean, that marvellous inn he built up from nothing. He's written to ask me whether I might be able to get him a job working for the king. I don't understand what can have happened. Harold says he and the family are actually going hungry." "It'll be the Ickabog, won't it?" said Burt. "Jeroboam's the nearest city to the marshlands. People have probably stopped visiting taverns at night in case they meet the monster on the way." "Yes," said Mrs. Beamish, looking troubled. "Yes, maybe that's why. Oh, gracious me, I'm late for work." Setting Cousin Harold's letter down on the table, she said, "Put some oil of cloves on that tooth, love," and giving her son a quick kiss, she hurried out of the door. Once his mother had gone, Burt went and flung himself down on his bed and sobbed with rage and disappointment. Meanwhile, anxiety and anger were spreading through the streets of the capital. Shoeville had at last found out that their relatives in the north were so poor they were starving and homeless. When Lord Spittleworth returned to the city that night, he found serious trouble brewing.